on 92 to 95 FM, on BBC Sounds and on your smart speaker. This is BBC Radio 4.
Hello, good evening. It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to The World Tonight. I'm Sean Lang. The American journalist Evan Gershkovich has been freed in one of the most dramatic prisoner swaps between the United States and its allies and Russia since the end of the Cold War. I've been speaking to one of his newspaper editors.
We're utterly thrilled and over the moon and completely elated, and it's been a day of emotion in our newsroom. There have been tears, I'll tell you, and we're just elated.
Also tonight, why whistleblowers who gave evidence to an internal BBC inquiry into the behaviour towards them of Hugh Edwards are criticising the way it was handled. The female boxer who abandoned her Olympic bout after 46 seconds against an opponent and who's reignited the debate over gender and sport.
I said stop. Could have been the match of my life, but I needed to protect my life as well. I couldn't bear the pain.
We'll discuss what rules should govern levels of testosterone with the ex-boxer and promoter Kelly, formerly Frank Maloney. And the last time an umpire will say these words, game, set and match, to a tennis icon.
Forehand return. It's gone long. It's all over. The match is over. Fritz and Paul win. But the career is over as well.
Andy Murray's career ended tonight. That's his professional career after he and doubles partner lost their Olympics match. We'll have a tribute from fellow former pro Joe Drury. That's all after the BBC News, read this evening by Charles Carroll.
President Biden has hailed a major prisoner swap between Russia and the West as a feat of diplomacy. 26 people, including 2 children, were involved in the exchange. Among them was the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was jailed on espionage charges. Our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, sent this report from Moscow.
It was the largest East-West prisoner exchange since the Cold War. It involved 26 people being held in 7 different countries. Among those freed from Russian jails, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, and U.S.-Russian journalist Alsu Kurmasheva. Released too, and now out of the country, prominent Kremlin critics and anti-war campaigners like Vladimir Karamurza and Ilya Yashin. In exchange, 10 people are returning to Russia, among them spies and agents, including Vadim Krasikov, a convicted assassin identified by a German court as having links to the Russian state. For the families and friends of those released today from Russian prisons, this is a moment to celebrate. But for the Kremlin, this is mission accomplished. The likely takeaway for Moscow will be that hostage diplomacy works, and that means we're likely to see more of it.
GPs in England have voted overwhelmingly to take industrial action, which could see doctors limiting patient appointments. The British Medical Association has announced an immediate work to rule and has told its members they can limit appointments to 25 a day in dispute over funding levels. NHS England has warned that the action could cause significant disruption beyond GP services. The Director General of the BBC, Tim Davies, says the corporation is looking at options to reclaim pay from Hugh Edwards, who yesterday pleaded guilty to accessing indecent images of children. In an interview with the BBC, Mr. Davies also defended the decision not to sack the presenter after his arrest in November. Lisa Mazimba reports.
There's been pressure on the BBC and its Director General since it was revealed that senior figures at the corporation were informed in November last year that Hugh Edwards had been arrested and was being investigated in relation to images of child abuse. Questions have been raised about whether the BBC should have made Edwards' arrest public, why he wasn't sacked at that point, and why Edwards not only was continued to be paid his full salary, but also was given a £40,000 pay rise, despite being off air since July 2023. Tim Davies said that Edwards' pay rise was due to standard inflationary increases as well as contractual decisions made prior to any allegations to expand the scope of his work for the BBC. Tim Davies also confirmed that the BBC was told in November about the category of offences that Edwards was being investigated for, and that he felt that the BBC had to make difficult decisions, but that the police had emphasised that it was important to keep Edwards' arrest confidential in order for them to be able to properly carry out their investigation.
Sir Keir Starmer has announced what he's called a new capability across police forces as part of efforts to tackle the disorders seen in parts of the UK after the Southport stabbings. In recent days, there's been unrest in a number of places, including central London, Hartlepool, Manchester and Southport itself. Speaking at a news conference after meeting senior police officers at Downing Street, the Prime Minister said the scenes of unrest were not protests, but crime being driven by far-right hatred.
So far as the far right is concerned, this is coordinated, this is deliberate, this is not a protest that has got out of hand. It is a group of individuals who are absolutely bent on violence.
Earlier, a judge lifted restrictions preventing the 17-year-old suspect in the Southport knife attack from being named. Axel Rudakubana has been charged with 3 counts of murder and 10 of attempted murder. The head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, has said that the battle with Israel has entered a new stage on all fronts after it killed one of the group's top military commanders. Fouad Shukr died in a strike on Tehran yesterday. Speaking at his funeral, Sheikh Nasrallah said that Hezbollah was considering a real studied response to the attack. The Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, has said the decision to cut interest rates marks an important moment in time. The base rate fell from 5.25 to 5%, reduction in more than 4 years. Mr. Bailey said he expected further rate cuts, but warned that it may not be mission accomplished in the battle against inflation.
I hope and expect that we're on a path where we will remove this persistent element of inflation, as we expect we will. By the way, we're not expecting anything else at the moment, and that over time, therefore, policy will become less restrictive, so rates will come down. But I'm not going to predict when, and I'm not going to predict how much, because that really does depend on events and how it unfolds. But that is the path I'm hoping for.
Andy Murray's tennis career has ended with a defeat in the quarter-finals of the men's doubles at the Paris Olympics. The 3-time Grand Slam winner and his partner, Dan Evans, were beaten in straight sets by the Americans Tommy Paul and Taylor Fritz. Jonathan Overend was commentating as Murray was cheered off the court.
It's actually Dan Evans in tears as Murray, a stoic Murray, comes out into the centre of court.
Andy Murray!
And that's a really nice touch from Murray to take the ovation, to come out, to understand that the crowd want to give him the love. And he puffs his cheeks out. Reality is most definitely there, that is that. And I think by making that gesture, we can now categorically say that this will be the last time we see Andy Murray walk off a tennis court.
All of Team GB's 3 medals today were claimed by rowers, including a silver for Helen Glover and her team in the women's 4. There were bronze medals in the men's 4 and the women's double sculls. Team GB's medal count for the Games so far now stands at 20. Elsewhere at the Paris Olympics, Simone Biles continued to make history as she secured gold in the all-around for women's gymnastics. The 27-year-old is the oldest winner to take the title and the first to secure it at 2 non-consecutive games.
Thanks very much, Charles. You're listening to The World Tonight with Sean Lay. The White House describes today's hostage swap as a feat of diplomacy. It is that, but of a particular kind that Western governments say is practiced by Russia and other countries, hostage diplomacy. Arresting foreigners or Russians who are dual national and jailing them, eventually releasing them in exchange for someone Moscow really wants back. In all, 16 people were freed, and in return 8 prisoners were sent home to Russia. This included a couple who'd been convicted in Slovenia. Their 2 children accompanied their parents on the flight home. At the White House earlier this evening, accompanied by some of the Americans heading home, the relatives of some of the Americans heading home, President Joe Biden gave a robust defense of the deal.
The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined in difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again.
Mr. Biden praised Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway and Turkey for making what he called bold and brave decisions by allowing to go free people those countries say were fairly convicted. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz agreed to free Vadim Krasikov, convicted of murdering a Chechen exile in a Berlin park. Vladimir Putin had previously told an American interviewer he wanted him home. 2 names have received particular attention in the United States: Evan Gershkovich, a reporter with the Wall Street Journal, and the former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, who was working for an automotive car parts company when the Russians detained him. They are expected to touch down in the United States in the next few hours on a flight carrying them from the Turkish capital, Ankara. Jeremy Byrne, the BBC's international editor, is in Washington and told me what we know about how the exchange came about.
Well, the detail is coming out now thick and fast, especially in the Wall Street Journal, because, of course, their reporter, Evan, was one of the leading characters in this drama. There have been lots and lots of interlocking and highly secret clandestine meetings, negotiations, different sorts of information passed to each other, messages written down on paper and delivered by hand in case of eavesdropping. It's been going on, you know, for lots of times, a lot of it beneath the surface. Evan Gershkovich's mother was also very involved. She even at one stage, someone who was born in Russia, went back there and subjected herself to an interrogation by the security services in the hope that maybe that could get a message through that he needed to be released. And in the end, presidents were involved. President Biden, it's been revealed, only an hour or so before he announced that he wasn't going to run for re-election, got on the phone to the Prime Minister of Slovenia to dot the I's and cross the T's in terms of the release of two Russian spies who'd been found there, and today I saw video of them walking down the steps to be greeted by Putin on the tarmac. A couple, their two kids, the mother and the daughter, being given massive bunches of flowers by the Russian president. So yeah, it's been a very, very detailed negotiation, and in the end I think what it came down to was the price was right for Putin, that he was getting back the right kind of Russians to justify releasing the people that he had, that he was able then to get back the people he wanted.
You mentioned spies. Some might draw breath at the prospect, though, of a convicted murderer being among those swapped, and that depended on the say-so of the German Chancellor.
Yes, because this was the assassin who had come into Berlin under a different name, and he had, in broad daylight, shot a Chechen dissident and was captured while he tried to escape. Said very little at his trial, not even his real name. That was a Bulgarian journalist ferreted that out in the end. And he was someone who clearly Putin wanted back badly. So if there were moral scruples about releasing a convicted killer, an assassin, a professional assassin, well, they put them to one side because I think they had to be pragmatic. They had to realize that if they wanted back these people who were in Russian jails, the price was going to be high, and they were just going to have to hold their noses a bit in terms of who they let out.
How is this playing in the United States this evening?
I think the White House is doing a lap of honor. They are giving a lot of detail about things that President Biden particularly did to help this process on. Trump himself has attempted to claim a bit of credit on social media, not very convincingly, it has to be said. So yeah, they are rejoicing in terms of getting these people back, and President Biden did a speech where he said, look, this just shows that we in America will fight to get our people back. You know, longer term, though, there are clearly concerns that come from this, because we live in a very fractured world, and, you know, one of the messages coming out of this is that bartering prisoners for other sorts of captives, well, it works. This kind of pressure on an enemy, arrest their people, trumped up charges, get back your spies, get back your assassins. Well, it's worked very nicely for President Putin.
Jeremy Bowen in Washington. Just a fortnight ago, Paul Whelan's sister Elizabeth told the world tonight she'd been down to Washington in a bit of a fit, because she'd heard nothing for some time after previous deals to free him had fallen through. Mr. Whelan is a former US Marine, and he'd been held even longer than Paul Gershkovich. Although we spoke on the day that Mr. Gershkovich was sentenced to 16 more years in jail, Elizabeth Whelan had sounded hopeful.
This has been about 5.5 years. You know, there have been a number of offers and attempts made to get Paul released, along with other prisoners over time. And in some cases, those other people have come back and Paul has not. But I am reassured, and I do believe those efforts are ongoing.
and they've yielded results today. Last week, Julian Warwicker spoke to Pavel Batorin, who is the partner of another American journalist, Arzu Kurmashiva, who's also been freed today, and he described the impact his partner's detention has had on their family.
My two daughters have been without their mother for over a year. They miss her very much. They know that she's not a criminal. Her government here in the United States knows that she's done nothing wrong. The free world will not accept this verdict. She will return to the free world, and she will receive a hero's welcome.
Those were interviews over the last 2 weeks. I spoke this evening to someone who has been waiting for this day to come for many months. Gráinne McCarthy, International Chief Digital Editor at the Wall Street Journal and a friend of Evan Gershkovich.
We're utterly thrilled and over the moon and completely elated, and it's been a day of emotion in our newsroom here in London and across our newsroom. There have been tears, I'll tell you, and we're out right now and some of my colleagues are getting drinks, and we're just kind of eagerly sharing every glimpse we get of Evan. We've seen some footage of him on the plane, and we've seen footage of him on the American plane, and we've seen some pictures, and we're just kind of like elated.
Front page news tomorrow for the print edition.
For sure.
And I guess right now and for quite a lot longer online.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have gone with a very big layout on our website. I mean, this is a story that's so close to our hearts, but it's also a very big geopolitical story. And we're just eager to see what's next for Evan as he kind of gets home and gets to be with his family and reunite with his loved ones.
Has the organisation had any contact with him at all since his arrest?
Well, we haven't had any direct contact with him. We haven't been able to speak to him on the phone, for instance, but we have had some very brave lawyers who've worked for us throughout this process in Russia and who would get in to see Evan roughly once a week, and they would chat to him for hours, and they're amazing people. And then we were able to communicate via them and also by writing letters to Evan, and he would write back, and I could tell you there was nothing better in your day than getting a letter from Evan. So we've had some contact, but it's been somewhat stilted.
Did it come as a surprise?
Well, I think from the very beginning of this horrendous ordeal, we knew that there was a playbook here that President Vladimir Putin was resorting to of, hostage diplomacy and grabbing Americans and using them as political pawns. Evan himself has covered that story in Russia, and so we anticipated that we would get to this day, but, from the very beginning we had no idea how long it would take. When Evan's sham trial, and let's be clear, it was a sham trial based on absolutely baseless allegations, took place in a very quick fashion last month in Russia. We hoped that this might be the precursor to some sort of a resolution, but you never know when you're dealing with President Putin.
Were there ever moments where you just thought this is going to last the full 16 years? I mean, that was the sentence he was in the end, and I should say 16 years in addition to him already having been held in detention that he was sentenced to a fortnight ago.
Yeah, he's already been held for 16 months of his life that were stolen from him. I never really chose, and many of us chose, to remain optimistic, so I didn't focus too much on the 16 years, to be honest, and just thought, the way we viewed the trial and the sham outcome was we hoped earnestly that it would up the pressure even further on the Biden administration and, allies to get a deal done. So we hoped that would happen, and here we are today, so we couldn't be happier.
What confidence does it give you to send journalists in future to Russia?
I think we have to be careful about not just Russia, but other countries that have shown lenience or a sort of a tendency to take not just journalists off the street, but other foreign citizens. I think we'd be very, very wary about sending someone back to Russia.
What will you do when you finally see him, for real, in person?
I can't wait. I think I'm just going to give him the biggest hug. And I can't wait to go and sit down and have a burger with him. We all cooked up a bunch of what we called Evan burgers in his honor recently. He likes a good one, so I just can't wait to do that. And we don't know when we'll see him next back in London. He's on his way to the US right now and to be reunited with his family. And we're thrilled for them and thrilled for him to be able to do that. And we just can't wait to see him whenever he's ready.
That's the view from his former employers at the, I say former employers, current employers, of course, because he's been stuck in jail. He's still been working for the Wall Street Journal. Brian McCarthy, who is obviously looking forward to welcoming him back to the newsroom once he's recovered from his ordeal. Well, all the people involved were flown, as I said, to Ankara, the capital of Turkey. The Americans are still in the air on the journey from there, but the journey to Moscow is much shorter, and so the passengers touched down there a little after 8 o'clock. President Putin was on the tarmac to greet them in Moscow, and there were bunches of flowers and broad smiles. Keir Giles from the Russia and Eurasia programme at Chatham House, the foreign policy think tank, told me about those who have been returned.
There's a motley assortment of deep-cover spies, cyber criminals, insider traders, all of them with links of some degree or another with the Russian intelligence services, and all of them deeply unsavory characters that are being released and replaced with these hostages that are being released from the Russian prisons. Now, there's the downside, of course, that all of this will encourage Russia to do it more because it's a huge success for the Kremlin. They take people hostage, they get their own people back, they use the value of those individuals that have been imprisoned for petty acts of dissent in Russia and then got international attention for a win-win situation. They get rid of the irritant by putting these people abroad instead of in their own prisons, and also they get value because they manage to exchange them for people they really want returned to Russia.
How will ordinary Russians react to this? Is it possible to get a sense of how they will feel?
Well, leaving aside the fact that many ordinary Russians by now will be reacting in precisely the way that state media wishes them to react because they know that that is the healthy choice, of course there's going to be a certain amount of gratification that the individuals that Russia has sent abroad to do jobs, to carry out tasks against the West, have actually been released and will be returned home and rewarded, no doubt. Plus, of course, Russian media is spinning the idea that because these Western citizens and these minor dissidents have been exchanged as part of this process, that in itself is an admission of guilt. So plainly, they must have all been spies for Western intelligence. So whichever way you look at it, the Russian state media and the Kremlin will be able to spin this to their advantage, and there's no doubt that plenty of ordinary Russians will go along with that.
Well, in the last few minutes, the US Vice President Kamala Harris has issued a statement praising the prisoner swap with Russia. She says she's spoken to Yulia Navalny, the widow of Alexei Navalny, the opposition leader who died in jail in Russia. She told her the United States stands with all of those who are fighting for freedom in Russia. Paul Whelan's the former Marine on his way back to the US and is a constituent of Congresswoman Haley Stevens, a Democrat in Michigan. And I spoke to her just before we came on air.
It's just been an amazing day, and to get to see the freedom of these individuals secured and the public servants who made it possible.
President Biden had a big role in this. We are told, according to my BBC colleagues in Washington, that he was involved in this on the morning that he announced that he would not be seeking re-election, which perhaps gives us an idea of how this has been preying on the minds of people in the White House and in the administration more generally. Is this a success story, or is it kind of feel a bit like, yes, it's a success story, we've got these people out, but there is a risk that more of this will happen in future?
So there's many things that Russia accomplished in detaining these individuals wrongfully, unjustly, cruelly. Paul Whelan for 5.5 years, over 2,000 days. And the motivation wasn't just the negotiation and the outcome of the prisoner swap, although, yes, there's absolutely frustrations that have come with that. I speak as a member of Congress and not someone who's in the administration, but I'm in the parliamentarian body, although we're not a parliament. I'm in the congressional legislative body. And I've got a role to play here, and the administration has a role to play here. It was heartbreaking when Victor Bout was swapped for Brittany Griner, and Brittany got onto the plane, got into U.S. custody, and said, "Where's Paul?" She thought she was being released with Paul. And a lot of people thought she was being released with Paul, even those in the Biden administration who were working on this deal. And we were one-upped by Russia, and a decision was made very last minute to make that trade. The trade isn't why Russia is exclusively pursuing these activities. And it's not just Russia that is taking Americans or Western citizens into custody, into the hostage or wrongful detainee sphere. They are doing this for the weaponization of diplomacy, of government. They are using Americans as political pawns.
J.D. Vance, the Republican nominee for vice president, says we have to ask ourselves why they're coming home. I think it's because bad guys all over the world recognise Donald Trump's about to be back in office, so they're cleaning house. What do you make of that statement?
I think J.D. Vance doesn't know what he's talking about. He's been in the Senate for a year. I've been doing this work 5 times as long as him, and I'm his exact age. And anyone who was familiar with this case would know that Paul Whelan was taken when Donald Trump was president. Donald Trump failed to bring him home, and Joe Biden did get him home. Joe Biden is a tried and true leader, whereas Donald Trump is erratic and lost sight of Paul Whelan and forgot about him and was too busy hobnobbing with celebrities at the foreign level and forgetting about individuals like Paul. And I maybe that sounds a little bit political, but let's be honest here. What Donald Trump should be doing and what J.D. Vance should be doing is celebrating this moment. It is not a partisan moment. It is absolutely not partisan. This is a moment for us to all come together as Americans, regardless of party affiliation, and recognize what it means to be in the land of the free and the home of the brave.
That's Congressman Haley Stevens talking to me this evening about her constituent Paul Whelan, who, among others, is on their way home tonight to the United States. Now here, the Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy has met the BBC Director General Tim Davie to discuss how the corporation handled Hugh Edwards. Her department has released a statement tonight saying Ms Nandy asked the BBC what safeguards and processes have been followed in this case and what further action may be taken in regard to the handling of licence fee payers' money. Yesterday, the former presenter pleaded guilty to accessing indecent images of children. He will be sentenced later. In an interview with BBC News today, Mr Davie defended the decision not to sack him, despite knowing that the presenter had been arrested in November over the most serious category of indecent images of children.
No one knew about the specifics of what we heard over the last few days, which has been deeply disturbing. Now, when it comes to the decision that we made in November, when we were obviously faced with, I think, a very difficult decision, actually, and we considered it very carefully. The police came to us and gave us information that they had arrested Mr Edwards, but they wanted to be assured of total confidence, and the reason they rang us at that point was to ensure that, and it's a technical process, which is to ensure employees are protected.
Hugh Edwards had already been suspended earlier last year. He resigned in April of this year. He'd been subject to an internal investigation into complaints made against him by colleagues, complaints that were separate to this criminal investigation that ended with him being charged and yesterday pleading guilty. Lucy Manning is the BBC's special correspondent. She's spoken to 2 of those who came forward to the BBC's internal inquiry. She says they're feeling let down about how that investigation was handled.
Last year, the BBC encouraged members of BBC staff to come forward. This was in the light of the allegations that The Sun originally ran about Hugh Edwards, and we reported on some allegations internally that people were saying that they had got inappropriate and sometimes flirtatious messages from Hugh Edwards, people that worked alongside him, and they felt that that was inappropriate and abuse of power. So the BBC launched an internal investigation to try and get to the bottom of that, and there was encouragement emails went out for staff to come forward, and none of that internal investigation has been made public. And I spoke to one former employee today who gave evidence to that inquiry. And the Sun newspaper first reported this story earlier today, but I also spoke to the same person, and they told me that they had received messages from Hugh Edwards when he had been reporting on Prince Philip's funeral. And when Hugh Edwards was covering that funeral, he sent the colleagues suggestive messages about his hotel room with a photo of the bed, saying there was plenty of room. And this person told the inquiry about this and other messages, and actually they were in tears telling me about how they felt let down by the BBC. They want the findings of the internal investigation to be published, and they said it doesn't seem transparent. It seems like things have been swept under the carpet and they've marked their own homework. A second staff member, last year we reported that they had received what they claimed were flirtatious and inappropriate private messages from Hugh Edwards talking about their appearance. They also told me today that they're disappointed not to have heard more about the inquiry's progress. They said speaking to the investigators had been an ordeal and they didn't feel reassured that BBC management had taken steps to deal with internal complaints or issues with power dynamics in the newsroom. Tim Davie said in an interview he gave to BBC News colleagues today that the BBC aren't sitting on anything that needs to go to the police and there's nothing else of a serious nature, but it's quite clear that some of those people that participated in the internal investigation want to hear what the findings are, and that doesn't seem to be happening.
And those findings have not been disclosed to them, even on condition of keeping it confidential.
No.
Because he no longer works for the BBC.
Yeah, as one said to me, they found out more from reading the newspapers than from the BBC. They said that they felt that the questions they were being asked were sensible questions, that it was being taken seriously, but it seems that there was no appetite in the BBC for that to be published. And frankly, it seems like it's been shelved, and there are people working in the newsroom, or who did work in the newsroom, that think that the management need to do more to reassure staff that some of these issues that they believe still persist with the dynamics between senior and junior staff have been looked at, and the bosses are thinking how things can change.
Lucy Manning talking to me earlier about the Hugh Edwards case. Now, the decision of the Italian boxer Angela Carini to abandon her Olympic bout against Imaine Khalif from Algeria after the first punch has ignited again the debate over gender and sport. Speaking to the BBC after the match, which lasted 46 seconds, Angela Carini said she'd never faced a punch like it.
I said, stop. Could have been the match of my life, but I needed to protect my life as well. I couldn't bear the pain.
Angela Carini speaking through an interpreter. Imaine Khalif is one of two boxers disqualified from the Women's World Boxing Championships last year for not meeting gender eligibility rules. The International Olympics Committee, the IOC, says both boxers met the Olympics' own rules. Although it said that Imaine Khalif was disqualified at last year's World Boxing Championships because of elevated levels of testosterone, the International Boxing Association, which administers them, says Khalif underwent a different form of testing. So it's a bit confusing, not least, of course, because Angela Carini hasn't said why she made the decision and what motivated that decision beyond the immediate impact of the punch. Let's talk now to the retired boxing manager and promoter Kelly Maloney. As Frank Maloney, she was involved in professional boxing for almost 30 years and most notably managed Lennox Lewis to his undisputed heavyweight championship role. Also with us is Joanna Harper. Joanna is visiting fellow for transgender athletic performance and a PhD researcher at Loughborough University. Dr. Harper has been an expert advisor to many federations, including the International Olympics Committee. Welcome to you both. Kelly Maloney first. I wondered what you were feeling when you saw Angela Carini's decision to abandon her Olympic hopes today.
I was a bit shocked. I didn't watch any of the Olympics, but I read most of the articles, and you know, I was amazed the way the papers are attacking her, and you know, she's not a trans woman, for one, and most papers are declaring she's a trans woman.
This is Imaine Khalif you're referring to, yeah?
Yes. I believe she's intersex, and you know, it's the way she's born. She's suffering the same way the South African runner Caster
Semenya
has been treated. But if you go through her record, I'm surprised the Italian girl quit so quick, because an English boxer, Andy Broadhurst, beat her in 2022, and she said, I didn't feel any punches extra strong or extra hard. I'm just sorry for both fighters, really. I mean, the Olympic Committee have made this poor Algerian boxer's life an absolute misery now. She'll never be the same again. It's really destroyed two people's careers, I think. You know, the Olympic Committee are to blame for this situation.
Joanna Harper, this is a fraught subject, not least because the regulators don't seem to agree with each other on what tests to use and, in a sense, what criteria to apply.
That's correct. In the 2021 IOC framework, they specifically allow the question of gender eligibility to be left up to the individual federations. And for instance, World Athletics and FIFA have substantially different athletic requirements for DSD athletes to compete in the female category. However, the IBA, the Boxing Association, which did not allow Khalifa to fight in last year, has a dispute with the IOC, and so the IOC now has a deputized boxing authority that answers to the IOC, and they have allowed Khalifa and the Taiwanese boxer to fight, I don't think that's an unreasonable decision. It's not necessarily the right decision either. The fact is, we don't know enough about these athletes. We don't know for certain that they have a DSD. We don't know if they have a DSD.
Sorry, just to interrupt, because you used that phrase once before. It's basically, to clarify, what does that mean? Differences in sex development is what it stands for, but what does it mean?
Well, it means that there are any number of medical conditions that can cause somebody to be not entirely male or female, and in particular in sports, XY DSDs, where somebody has an XY chromosome and the testes that come with it, but is born with external female genitalia and hence are identified as female at birth, are particularly thorny for sports.
Kelly Maloney, just thinking back to your career, would you have been comfortable as someone who was transgender, if you had been at that stage, in competing in women's boxing?
No, I don't think transgender women should be allowed to compete in female sports. You know, when I first transitioned, I was all for it, but I listened to a lot of sports. I still work with a lot of sports scientists and doctors, and since reading a number of papers, there are certain sports I would definitely not agree with for trans women to compete in. But we keep going back to the word trans.
You're right. No,
these two boxers are not trans
perfectly
women.
fair
Please,
point. No.
let's make this straight. You know, the trans community are being picked on over this situation, especially by the Daily Mail. I mean, they're just going mad with the story on social media, and the keyboard warriors. For this poor girl, or this poor person, let's say, her life has been destroyed over this one event. And the Olympic Committee should hold their head in shame for allowing it to happen.
Ellie Maloney and Dr. Joanna Harper, thank you both very much. Now, earlier this week, we discussed on the programme the government's plans to fast-track the building of new homes in this country. But Britain is far from alone in facing a housing crisis. In Australia, soaring rents have led to a rising demand for homelessness services. The problem is particularly acute in Western Australia, the wealthiest part of the country. So what's gone wrong? Our Australia correspondent, Casey Watson, has been to Perth.
I've got my walker in the back and my pillows and rugs.
71-year-old Mary is sat in the driver's seat of her battered car, surrounded by her belongings. On the back seat is her Zimmer frame. Next to her, there's a tin of rice pudding.
And that's my evening meal.
This tiny space is often now Mary's home. On occasion, she gets respite care, but it's never guaranteed. Mary's not her real name. She doesn't want to be identified. She's ashamed.
It seems to be that the moment people know that you've become homeless, you've become what I call a non-person.
It's a life Mary never imagined she'd ever have. Pushed out of her flat last year because her landlord wanted to rent it out to short-term tenants, she couldn't find anywhere else she could afford on her pension. Mary's husband is in a care home with Alzheimer's. He doesn't know she's living like this.
He'd be horrified. absolutely mortifying.
A 15-minute drive from the car park that Mary's living in is Elizabeth Quay in the centre of Perth. Swish new apartment blocks and five-star hotels overlook glamorous white yachts bobbing in the marina. And then if you look up, there are big neon signs on skyscrapers with the names of mining companies. It's hard to get your head around that in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, there are people like Mary with nowhere to sleep through no fault of their own. And this isn't a problem that's particular to Perth. In fact, it's happening across Australia. Older women are the fastest growing group of homeless people in the country. Domestic violence also drives numbers up. But there's something else happening. In recent years, record house prices have killed many people's dream of getting on the property ladder. Underinvestment in social housing and a growing population mean finding somewhere affordable to rent can be a challenge. It's created a new face of homelessness.
Why did you go to your appointment?
St Patrick's Community Support Centre in East Fremantle helps people like Mary. And Michael Pugh is the chief executive.
We're seeing older people, working families that simply can't afford to keep a roof over their head. A single trigger can push people into homelessness, and there really is very few options for them, and they don't know where to start because they've never had that experience in the past.
Hayley and her daughter Tasicha have been couch surfing and living in tents for nearly 4 years, most of Tasicha's life. They're on the list for social housing, but nothing yet. Hayley's tired and she's worried about her daughter too.
She's constantly getting sick. It doesn't matter if I rug her up, it's the bacteria that are around. It's moving around, getting used to different germs. She's going through a bit of separation anxiety from her father at the moment because it's very hard to try and see him all the time.
As evening falls and commuters exit their shiny office buildings and head home, others start gathering in a square that backs onto the railway tracks. Every night, different charities take turns to offer a little help. The Australian winter's now kicked in, and clothes are in high demand.
You okay for a blanket and stuff?
And the street chaplains are out tonight. 4 women giving out food to those sleeping rough.
Can I give you a meal?
Just a few months ago, Michelle Rumbold was the one receiving the handouts. A registered nurse left with nothing after she got evicted, crashed her car, and her mother started struggling with her mental health.
I ended up losing my job purely because I didn't have accommodation and I didn't have a car. I think it took a while for people to actually realise I was homeless because I didn't look homeless. Gradually over time you become so used to the street that you lose yourself a bit.
Michelle managed to get transitional housing. She's now back on her feet with a job as a nurse in a GP's surgery. Michelle admits she got lucky, but with no quick solutions to Australia's housing crisis, many more will be finding themselves in a desperate situation that they never expected.
Katie Watson reporting. In Paris tonight, the end of Andy Murray's professional career.
Forehand return. It's gone long. It's all over. The match is over. Fritz and Paul win. But the career is over as well. If we take Andy Murray at his word, that is that. And there is a...
It was a straight sets defeat for Andy Murray and Dan Evans against the American third seeds Taylor Fritz and Tommy Paul at the quarter-final of the men's Olympics tennis doubles. Well, Joe Jury was British #1 for 9 years and was ranked world #5 in a career which started as a junior in the 1970s and continued as a professional into the 1990s. Joe, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It was an emotional scene at the stadium, the Roland Garros Stadium, a stadium, of course, you know well.
Yes, it's a lovely stadium, and, you know, what a way to go out, actually, for Andy Murray. You know, one of the greatest sportsmen this country has ever known. And, you know, he's fighting to the end in that doubles. They did so well. I mean, those other doubles, I could hardly watch those other rounds. Those match points they saved. It's just typical Andy Murray, the way he went about his tennis. And yes, it was very emotional for him, for everybody. For Dan Evans, you could see, you know, he did his bit too. But what a wonderful career. I mean, just fantastic.
The voices of fans of all nationalities, I suspect, were heard around the stadium as they chanted Andy Murray's name. It wasn't always thus, was it? He had a bit of a reputation among fans of being a bit grumpy, but he certainly lined up.
Well, that was part of him, wasn't it? That grumpiness and muttering on court. But you've never seen such a fierce competitor as Andy Murray. He got the very best out of himself. And, he couldn't have asked any more of himself, I don't think, throughout his career. That he was one of the fittest, one of the fastest. He's so talented, and won Wimbledon after 77 years. I mean, that takes some guts and courage to do that.
You've been in that spotlight before. I mean, the pressures on players from this country in tennis have always been difficult, haven't they? I mean, it was, to talk about male players, it was Henman's, and then it became Andy's mount outside on Wimbledon for the viewing position. It's always been dashed hopes until Andy Murray came along.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we hoped that there would be another Wimbledon champion, and he delivered. I think winning the Olympics, at Wimbledon really helped that, and just absolutely immense his whole career.
Show jury. Thank you very much. And that's The World Tonight, ending with a tribute to Andy Murray. I'm Sean Lay. Good night. We'll speak to you tomorrow.
Studio direction on The World Tonight was by Alicia Thirsting. The editor was Jack Hunter. Well, at 11 o'clock this evening, you can hear the Today podcast. And before that, it's our book at bedtime, Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. That's next.
Your love letter to the Paris Olympics.
On a board, on a bike, on field or on track. Bring those medals back.
It's a glorious goal. Knock it out the park.
And now you're here, the best that you can be. Just know the nation is so proud of fabulous Team GB.
What an achievement for Britain. Witness a love like no other.
In my heart, I've already won.
The Paris Olympics.
Watch on iPlayer, listen on BBC Sounds.
Well, we stay in Paris now. All this week on Radio 4, we're marking the centenary of the writer James Baldwin with a reading of his groundbreaking 1956 novel of shame and desire, Giovanni's Room. David, a young American living in Paris, has asked his girlfriend Hella to marry him. But while she's away in Spain considering his proposal, he's moved in with Giovanni, an Italian barman, and they've embarked on a passionate affair. The reader is Kyle Solar.
Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Episode 4. At last, there came the note which I had been waiting for, from Hella, telling me the day and hour she would arrive in Paris. I did not tell this to Giovanni. I walked out alone that day and went to the station to meet her. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Then I took her in my arms, and I was terribly glad to see her. She smelled of the wind and the sea and of space, and I felt in her marvelously living body the possibility of legitimate surrender. I told myself I would not think about Giovanni. I would not worry about him yet. For tonight, anyway, Hella and I should be together with nothing to divide us. Still, I knew very well that this was not really possible. He had already divided us. I tried not to think of him sitting alone in that room. Later, at the hotel, she asked me with a smile, "Have I been away too long?" "I don't know," I said. "It's been a long time." "It was a very lonely time," she said unexpectedly. Then, I'm not really the emancipated girl I try to be at all. I guess I just want a man to come home to me every night. I want to be able to sleep with a man without being afraid he's going to knock me up. Hell, I want to be knocked up. I want to start having babies. In a way, it's really all I'm good for. There was a silence. "Is that what you want?" "Yes," I said. "I've always wanted that." She lay on the bed watching me. I was terribly aware of her body and of mine. I walked over to her and put my head on her breast. I wanted to lie there, hidden and still. "Dear Dad," I wrote, "I won't keep any secrets from you anymore. I found a girl I want to marry, and we're planning to tie the knot while we're still over here and make our way home by easy stages. She's not French, in case you're worried. So, Now will you send your loving son some of his hard-earned money? Tout de suite. That's French for pronto. I know you'll love her, Dad, and she'll love you. She's already made me a very happy man. Hella and Giovanni met by accident after Hella had been in Paris for 3 days. During those 3 days, I had not seen him, and I had not mentioned his name. We were in a bookstore, and as Hella went over to speak to the woman at the counter, I wandered idly over to the farthest bookshelf. A man stood there leafing through a magazine. It was Jacques. Tiens, he cried. Here you are. We were beginning to think you had gone back to America. No, I'm still in Paris. I've just been busy. Then, with a terrible suspicion, I asked, Who's we? Why, said Jacques with a hard smile, your baby. It seems you left him alone in that room without any food, without any money, without even any cigarettes. He finally persuaded his concierge to allow him to put a phone call on his bill and called me. Poor boy sounded as though he would have put his head in the gas oven, if, he laughed, he had had a gas oven. Hella had joined us. You two have met before, I said awkwardly. Hella, you remember Jacques? He bowed low over her outstretched hand and became, in an instant, outrageously and offensively effeminate. Je suis ravi, mademoiselle. He knew that Hella disliked him, and this amused him. I watched him as though I were watching an imminent disaster from many miles away. David has been hiding from us, he murmured playfully, now that you are back. Oh, said Hella, taking my hand. That was very naughty of him. I'd never have allowed it, if I'd known we were hiding. She grinned. But then he never tells me anything. At that moment, the shop bell rang, and Jacques said, Ah, here is Giovanni. I felt him behind me, standing stock still, staring. When he spoke, his voice was thick with fury and relief. Where have you been? I thought you were dead. I thought you'd been knocked down by a car or thrown into the river. I was astonished at my calm. Giovanni, I said, I want you to meet my fiancée, Mademoiselle Hella. Monsieur Giovanni. Enchanté, mademoiselle, he said. His voice was dead and cold. For a moment, we all four stood there as though we were posing for a tableau. Really, said Jacques, I think we should have a drink. It's not every day that old friends get together. Darling, Hella said, you have a drink if you want to. I really can't. I don't feel well at all. She turned to Giovanni. Please forgive me, she said, but I've just come back from Spain. Another time, truly, but I must get some sleep tonight. I started backing away, as though I were backing out of a cage. I'll walk Hella home, I said. Maybe I'll see you later. I felt their eyes on our backs as we walked away from them. For a long while, Hella was silent. Then, so, who's Giovanni? She asked. She gave a little laugh. I just realized that I haven't even asked you where you were living. Are you living with him? We've been sharing a maid's room out at the end of Paris, I said. I ran out of money while you were away, and I moved in with him because it was cheaper. At that time, he had a job and was living with his mistress most of the time. Oh? She said. He has a mistress? He had a mistress, I said. He also had a job. He lost both. We'd reached the hotel. Is he a very good friend of Jacques? She asked. Perhaps not quite good enough to please Jacques. Tell me about Giovanni, she asked, much later while we lay in bed. How did you meet him? Oh, in a bar, one drunken night with lots of other people. Well, she said, I think we ought to take him out to dinner or something. After all, he did sort of rescue you. It's a good idea, I said. I don't know what he's doing these days, but I imagine he'll have a free evening. I got to Giovanni's room very late the next evening. As I came into the room, he sat up in bed, then turned on his side facing the wall and began to cry. I went to the bed and leaned over him. Baby, stop crying. Please stop crying. He turned back and held out his arms. Why have you gone away from me? I had hoped that I would feel nothing, but I felt a tightening in a far corner of my heart, as though a finger had touched me there. Why do you say nothing? He said. In a moment I thought, I will say something, and then I will walk out of this room forever. Yet when I opened my mouth, I made no sound. I felt terror and pity and a rising lust. I stood up. I heard Giovanni's moan behind me. Chérie, don't leave me. Please don't leave me. He was sobbing. It would have been said as though his heart would break. But I felt that it was my heart, which was broken. Something had broken in me to make me so cold and so perfectly still and far away. Giovanni, I said, you always knew that I would leave one day. You knew my fiancée was coming back to Paris. You were not leaving me for her, he said. If you were really in love with this little girl, you would not have had to be so cruel to me. She's not a little girl, I said. She's a woman, and no matter what you think, I do love her. You do not love anyone, he cried, sitting up. You love your purity. You walk around with your hands in front of you as though you had some precious metal, gold, silver, rubies, maybe diamonds, down there between your legs. You will never give it to anybody. You will never let anybody touch it, man or woman. You want to be clean. He grasped me by the collar. You want to leave Giovanni because he makes you stink. You want to despise Giovanni because he's not afraid of the stink of love. You want to kill him in the name of all your lying little moralities. And you are by far the most immoral man I have met in all my life. Giovanni, for God's sake, stop it. I can't help the way I feel. Do you know how you feel? I feel nothing now. I said, nothing. I want to get out of this room. I want to get away from you. I want to end this terrible scene. He laughed. At last you are beginning to be honest. And do you know why you want to get away from me? Inside me something locked. I cannot have a life with you. I was shaking. What kind of life can we have in this filthy little room? What kind of life can two men have together anyway? What do you think can happen between us? You know very well, said Giovanni.